I've got 3 basic tools and an assortment of leftover plywood, and in this video, I'm going to build a handsome, modern slat coffee table. Did I mention that I live in New York City and my workspace is a wooden pallet I found on the street? Well, perhaps by the end of this video, you'll be pleasantly surprised by the level of accuracy, fit and finish you might expect is possible to achieve with a setup like this. Let's get down to building. So being a software engineer by trade, I suppose it's only fitting that this project starts on the computer with a model. Now, the real reason I need a model for this project is because it comes together with almost completely offcuts from a previous project. So I really need to know the limitations of the size that I could possibly make with the materials that I have. Speaking of materials, we've got some repurposed metal hairpin legs from an old piece of furniture and plywood offcuts from a previous project. The first thing we need to do is start with that slat top. And now this is the part that was inspired by the Nelson bench, but it's also the most finicky because I have to make 27 of those teeny tiny spacer pieces that are just 1 inch by 1.5 inches. You can see me measuring it here because I really have to set up a jig and then not move it at all. Not only do you not want to get your hands close to the blade with such small pieces, but with so many repetitive cuts, if you're off just by a little bit on all of them, it'll really add up. And that's kind of the crux of this project when you're using only a circular saw and a crosscut jig. All right, welcome to day 2 of the coffee table project. Yesterday we ended up with 27 inch by 1.5 inch spacer slats, and right in front of me I've just dry laid out the slat portion of the coffee table. We're essentially going to do it in 2 parts. We're going to do the slat portion, which is what I have in front of me, and then the flat portion, and kind of smack them together and sort of sand it over so everything's smooth and even. Now, I did pre-finish the insides, but I left a little bit on each end unfinished so that the glue would stick. So at this point, let's get some glue on this, let it dry, and then we'll see where we're at. To make gluing easier, and this is kind of a necessity honestly with the amount of small pieces that I had, I clamped these 2 pieces of plywood at a right angle so I could just butt up all the spacer pieces and slats against it. This really helped during the glue up process. All those little tiny pieces wanted to shift around. And in the end, the glue up turned out pretty good. All right, well, let's keep chugging along. We'll get this sanded up, straightened out, and then we'll create the flat part and we'll go from there. You can see I'm measuring the width of the tabletop after I've put together all the slats. And that's just good practice. In the real world, there are always slight inconsistencies from your computer models, and I even cut this piece about 1/16 of an inch heavy and used my hand plane to fit it exactly. Now you can see how it's gonna all come together. We've got that flat piece butted up on either side by another straight 1.5 inch piece of plywood. Now the way all of this is gonna join together is with dowels and epoxy. Contrary to maybe popular belief, you can get good furniture grade quality with just a handheld doweling jig. You just have to be really careful and make sure the jig doesn't shift while you're drilling. I mixed up some epoxy, and I'm using epoxy instead of wood glue because it is an edge to face joint. And you can see I also drilled some pocket holes because I am a little bit worried about the strength of that joint. But after all of it came together, that's not going anywhere. Oh hey, welcome back. So we've got the flat side glued up here, and it's gonna go together something like this. Right now, this seam is really rough. We're gonna clean that up right now, and then hopefully by the end of today, we'll be able to attach these 2 pieces together so that tomorrow we can sand and finish this. It's New York, it's coming to the winter time, and because I don't have a workspace inside, we're kind of racing against the clock to get this thing done. This is the big moment, bringing together both of the sides of the coffee table. I'm using dowels again for alignment on this joint, but you really want to do a dry fit before committing to the dowel placement, especially on a very visible joint like this, because it's really easy to get just a little bit off with that handheld doweling jig. And if I were to do this project again, and if you're gonna do this project, I would really recommend not doing this in 2 halves. The only reason I did was because my offcuts wouldn't allow me to get a full length piece. All right, so the glue is dry and you can kind of see an idea of what we're gonna be working with here in the final product. It's still pretty rough. There's a lot of pencil mark, there's a lot of glue marks. So I think before we can do anything else, we gotta sand this down and see what we're working with. Okay, so I've sanded this whole thing to about 150 grit. And the next thing we have to do is sort of ease these edges over and make this sort of a polished, finished surface. To do that, I'm gonna add probably either an 1/8 inch or 1/16 inch round over all the way around the edges. And I'm gonna try to do that as well in the middle of the slats. Now that we've got those edges looking really nice with the hand plane, it's go time for finish. I used a homemade wipe-on satin polyurethane, which is just 1 part mineral spirits to 1 part oil-based polyurethane. I did 5 or 6 coats, sanding between each coat, and you really need to do that many coats because first off, this table will receive heavy use, and second of all, those plywood edges will really soak up the finish. I also turned those ugly mustard green hairpin legs into something just a little bit more sophisticated with a couple coats of black spray paint. I just screwed the legs to the bottom of the table, and with that, I think we're done. Wow, I am really proud of how this project turned out. For a coffee table made entirely of offcuts from a previous project, the size, overall aesthetic really came together quite well. I did add some hidden storage to this table. This is New York, there's not a lot of space. You gotta take advantage of every square inch. But I was able to hide the keyboard underneath this table and also magnet up the remote for the TV. So that's just a little extra hidden storage. Now I'm still loving this exposed plywood, and I finished this table off with about 5 coats of satin polyurethane because I didn't want to have to worry about using coasters. And I gotta say, the finish turned out really nice. It's this really great matte feel, and it feels great under my hand. To quickly touch on tools, I used only 3 for this project. And actually, let me go 1 second. Yeah, so I used a circular saw, router, and drill, but in all honesty, you can not use the router and you can just use a hand plane or sandpaper to get those rounded edges. And then the one thing I would really recommend if you're gonna do this project is you need a circular saw crosscut jig. But you really need it to be able to make those tiny little pieces, but you can do quite a lot with just a circular saw, so don't be intimidated by that. All right, that's all I've got for real this time. I'll talk to you later. Bye.